Hey everyone. I decided instead of doing a weekly blog post this week, I changed things up with a video. So let me ask you this. When was the last time you had someone outside of family, say, over for an informal coffee or just like a low-key dinner? And this isn't me fishing for an invite, though if that offer is there, I wouldn't say no. But I'm asking because I read an article the other day in The Atlantic called The Anti-Social Century. And it hit me hard. Its basic point is pretty straightforward. We're spending more time in physical isolation than ever before, and it is actually destroying us. Now, the reasons for this are myriad. Over the past few decades, there's been this sort of mass exodus to the suburbs, and that's resulted in us hanging out less on sort of our front porches with its built-in community-oriented space that allows for connections with our neighbors and the dog walkers and that, and more just sort of hanging out in the backyard, on our backyard patios with high fences around the yard and more privacy for our families. Technology is another huge factor. Consider television, for instance. Today, adults spend this is males, spend 7 hours watching television for every 1 hour spent outside of their homes with their buddies. Lots of that, of course, is streaming movies and the latest TV show. In fact, these days, get this, we go to the movies on average 3 times a year, but we're watching almost 19 hours of television alone on a weekly basis. More impactful than all of this, of course, has been the advent of the smartphone. Smartphones give us the illusion of connection while slowly replacing actual presence. Get this, the typical person is awake for about 900 minutes in a day. American kids and teenagers, and certainly you could kind of lump Canadians into this as well, they spend on average about 270 minutes on weekdays and 380 minutes on weekends just kind of staring into their phones. By this account, screens occupy more than 30% of our kids' waking lives, which honestly, that's a little bit disconcerting, isn't it? And yeah, some of that might be social in nature, but none of that is physical presence with one another. And then there's AI. And for many of us, it's kind of snuck up on us over the past few years. Society's collective detachment will continue to increase as AI continues to become more human-like. There's this website, character.ai. Already it has tens of millions of monthly users. And get this, they spend an average of 93 minutes a day chatting with their AI friend. But that kind of makes sense if you think about it. Who doesn't want a relationship with someone who never criticizes and never cheats on you, never insults you? They're always interested in you and you alone. Who cares if that someone happens to be a computer program? All of these factors have led to a concerning social detachment. Eating out, for instance, used to mean gathering around a table. Today, 74%, according to this article, of restaurant traffic is just takeout. Socially, we are getting together with friends 30% less than we did 20 years ago. And remember how during the pandemic, we were forced to isolate to protect each other? Those are weird days and we couldn't wait for it to end. Well, get this. Americans, and again, you can assume Canadians are the same here, we're spending more time alone in 2023 than we did in 2021. More time alone after the pandemic. So this isn't the pandemic's cause. This isolation has become a preferred pattern. Now, I already know this video has been long, I'm sorry, and I'm asking you to bear with me because here's the thing. It's not just that we're getting lonelier, friends. We're becoming different as a people, as a society. This kind of intentional social isolation is actually reshaping how we think and how we vote and how we treat others and even how we see the world as a whole. Here's a quick example that kind of stood out to me in this article that I think is valid. Consider the world of politics. Everyone's favorite thing to talk about these days. Let's call a spade a spade. Politics have become so tribal and so polarized and so taboo to discuss with one another, haven't they? Well, why is this? One researcher cited in the article asked us to imagine a hypothetical disagreement with another parent about the role of affirmative action at a PTA meeting. He says, were the disagreement to take place online, what would we do? Well, we would write them off as politically other and not worthy of our time, right? We would block them and then move on. Easy. But here's the thing that happens in a PTA meeting. We bite our tongue, and then maybe as the year rolls on, we discover that our daughters are in the same dance class. At after-school pickups, we swap stories about caring for our aging relatives. Although the differences might not disappear, the researcher notes that they're all folded into this sort of peaceful coexistence. And then what happens? Well, then you sign up to draft a diversity statement for the school as, PTA members. And guess what? You're suddenly able to accommodate each other's opposing views. Why? Because all of those encounters have allowed you to see the humanity in one another. But this requires physical interaction, in-person connection. Blocking them isn't an option in the messiness of real life. And as social creatures, this is how we learn tolerance and empathy and figuring out why people come at things the way that they do. So why am I, as a pastor, sharing all this? Well, I'm obviously biased, but it dawned on me as I was reading this article that one of the best antidotes to this troubling antisocial trend happens to be the church. And specifically, the life and the practice and the rhythms of presence that the church has baked into it. So for instance, showing up on a Sunday morning regularly, even when every fiber of our being wants to stay in bed just a little bit longer, or even if the pastor, whoever that is as boring as all get out. Listen, I get paid to be there. So yeah, it's easy for me to wag my finger and tell you get to church. And there's lots of reasons people have stopped attending. And honestly, most of them I can empathize with. But think about what the church offers. Yes, there's the ritual of the worship and the sermon and the sacraments, but beyond all of this, there is the ritual of community itself. Call it a practice of presence. When you show up, people see you. They talk with you. You talk with them. You discuss the kids' schools, their schedule. You talk about work that past week. You chat about sport. Think about it. There just are not that many sort of intentional spaces in the world today where this kind of thing happens on a regular basis. Now, obviously, church is more than an hour and a half on Sundays. It can start there, but it can't end there. It has to move out. And so I think, if I'm honest, and this is just for myself anyway, sometimes I'm happy to have a Sunday morning be a kind of standalone activity that I add to the end of my weekly to-do list. Maybe you can relate to that. But this attitude is what actually perpetuates the antisocial trend of our society at large. And so my encouragement, my challenge for all of us here is for us to push against this, to reorient how we think about church altogether. Less as a time slot and more of a way of life. Church is a way of life. So what does that look like? Well, so many things, but really simply, it means inviting someone over for coffee this week. No agenda, just presence. Maybe hosting a dinner. It, again, doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be, it can just be bread and paper plates, whatever. The food isn't the point, the table is. The weather these days is warming up. So maybe it's just asking someone at church to go for a walk with you at the marina, having a board games night, doing whatever. Go discover squash together at the complex. Sorry, I had to throw that one in there. Obviously, there are other things outside of church that can push against this trend, and you should lean into those as well. Call someone maybe instead of texting them. Set limits on your phone use. Make a habit this summer of going out and sitting on the front porch rather than the back deck. And all that's great and important. All I'm saying here is don't overlook the gift that is right there for the taking. The church is an institution that has baked right into the very fabric of its DNA all of the ingredients for pushing against this trend of isolating. God said in Genesis that it wasn't good for man to be alone. Despite society's countless efforts to resist this truth, we as the church are invited to affirm it by leaning into the practice of presence with one another. Thanks.